Welcome. A few thoughts about using stories as part of awareness training. In a previous video or written work, I talked about the contents of awareness, contents of consciousness. There's probably much longer list than what I will offer here, but much of what is in our awareness falls into broadly one of these groups. Thoughts. A lot of our awareness is about the chatter in our brains. And many of our thoughts are historical. They're memories of one type or another, rehashings of past events. Many of them are future-oriented. They are about anticipating things that might happen and scenarios that come up in our minds about how we might navigate the future. But they're very much about words and concepts. Another big part of what comes into awareness is our sensory data, sensations of touching, hearing, seeing, smelling. Missing a few, but these are very much oriented to the here and now. We can have memories of the sight of a beautiful sunset from last night, but most of our sensory inputs are very much just here and just now. Feelings are another big part of what forms consciousness. And feelings, to my way of thinking, are the most nuanced of all the different contents of consciousness. There is in feelings thought, sometimes not very cogent ones. Some feelings are very hard to describe. But part of the intensity of that feeling is its indescribability in having made some attempt. Feelings often have some sensory components to it. It has the look of our loved one's face. It has the sound of a voice. Feelings often have historical and future overlays. So they are very much an amalgam of many of the other contents of consciousness, all stewed together. And to my way of thinking, the way in which some of the parts is bigger than any of the parts themselves is about finding our way towards wholeness. Feelings can be wrong. They can be mistaken. I remember a patient I had who suddenly became very angry at me. And I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know what I've done." She said, "You rolled your eyes at me. That's what my dad did whenever he was writing me off. What I have to say matters. And I said, "Oh, I am so sorry. I'll let you know that I wasn't actually rolling my eyes. There was a spider coming down in between us, and I was looking up at it. Fortunately for me, the spider was still there, right in between us." And with the explanation of the spider, the feeling of being dismissed went away. It was a mistaken feeling. We have mistaken thoughts. Columbus sailed the deep blue sea in 1493. He's getting the rhyme wrong. It's Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. There's mirages where our senses see lakes in the middle of hot streets that aren't there. All of the different components, contents of our awareness, the contents of consciousness, can be mistaken. But there's something that gravitates towards wholeness in our feelings. Something worth paying attention to as they are taking and nuancing all the different things that we're experiencing. And we're suddenly afraid, and we aren't quite sure why. It might be a mistaken feeling, but it might be something to pay attention to. That there was some sound that our memory of the way that the world is clued into, that tells us that there might be a bear on the trail in front of us. Proceed cautiously. In my work with my therapist, he was all about feelings. His unstated goal, maybe it was my stated goal, was to cry in the office each session. It was a sign to me that I was getting somewhere. For my therapist, it was a chance to have a sense of deep connection on both of our parts. Let me tease this part. My sense in going to my therapist is that I was carrying a heavy backpack of rocks. And what I would do in therapy is take the backpack off, put it down in front of us, and then I would reach down into the pack and pull out one of the rocks. And it was covered in mud, and I would wash it with my tears. Sometimes I get a couple of them out. My grief over the passing of my father. The grief of having 100 patients in the last 3 months that were all wanting to kill themselves. And these were not things that I could do any therapy to get rid of. It was simply a matter of letting myself know that this is what I was carrying around all the time. So I get these burdens out, work with them, know them, see if there was something new about them to know about myself, how the world was. Wash them with my tears. And then back into the backpack they would go. And at the end of the session, I'd gather up the backpack, put it back on, and off I go. the burden felt different. There's something about sharing deeply with our own souls, with someone else, that connects us, that makes a sense of andness, as Kent Hoffman would call it. For many of us, showing emotion is all about a vulnerability that we don't like. But let me suggest to you a different way of understanding this. Vulnerability of our emotions is an invitation. When we choose to be vulnerable, it's a heroic act. There is a strength in being willing to be vulnerable. We share something close to our heart. We are giving the one that we share to the chance to be strong for us, to hold this with us when we can hardly hold it ourselves. And there's something about that makes the hearer feel good about themselves. I'm being trusted with this. It will tend to have them rise to the occasion, to be somebody that can come to our aid. It also plants the seed of, oh, Bill's been vulnerable with me. He's someone I can be vulnerable with in return. He gets this. I have kind of one up on him with knowing this. He's less likely to betray me in any kind of way if I'm vulnerable with him. It's an invitation at some later date to respond with vulnerability in turn. It's a strength to be vulnerable. It takes two people that felt alone and brings them together. So, the stories that I share are ones that move my heart. And fair reason why I'll regularly be verklempt, emotional, with sharing the stories that I choose is that they are ones that I am looking for having an experience of deep emotion, of feeling that integration of story and sensation, hopes, memories, some of which I can have words for, some of which I can't. All swirling together and coming out in this very present experience of being here with something that matters. There are lots of different ways towards coming to this present moment, to expanding our awareness. And listening to stories is only one of them. So, not only do I give you the invitation to just do the stories, I give you the invitation to skip all the stories. They're all just tools. And wondering which of these might be of most help to you. Just breathe. Thanks for your practice.